Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Lisa Cron's nonfiction work, Story Genius. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview of what the book is about, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Unfortunately, I don't have a cover to share. I did read this on an ebook. But real quick, Lisa Cron is a story analyst. She does some instructed work as an instructor, I believe the UCLA Extension Program. She's written 3 craft books now. This one, Story Genius, I think is probably her best known one. She recently wrote a book called Wired for Story, which I haven't gotten a chance to check out. She also serves as an instructor and coach as part of her work as an analyst. So she's essentially in the business of analyzing story, letting folks know what works and what doesn't. I thought this book dovetailed really nicely with that. It's about her viewpoint that the only thing that really matters in a story is how you relate to the main character and the main character's internal struggle. And she has a really good analogy that she uses throughout the book, which is basically what she calls the third rail of the book. Meaning the third rail, for those who may not know, it was where the power in a train lies. And so if you are connected to the third rail, you're able to move forward. If you're not connected to the third rail, the train doesn't move. And so she uses this analogy to kind of explain why sometimes in a book you may be reading it and the book doesn't feel like it's moving forward. There are other plot elements and things that are being set up in the book, but it doesn't feel like the book has propulsion. So I thought that was really interesting. I think overall that's a really interesting idea. She spends the first part of the book talking about a little bit about the science behind stories and why they're important to us as people. She does reference The Storytelling Animal, which is a book I've reviewed in the past for the channel. I'll leave a link there below before kind of moving on to what is essentially her writing craft book, where she talks about her method, or what the method she recommends for setting up stories, her system for doing it, and kind of takes you through those tools. And so I thought that overall, what I think the book does well is the main concept is really easy to understand. Like I said, I think the analogy of the third rail makes a lot of sense. She has a system for tracking different aspects of a book in terms of where you are in the scene process, as far as if your idea is kind of developed from a scene, from an idea into a full-fledged scene. She has a tool. I don't know if she calls it the 4 parts of a scene from the protagonist's point of view, but she basically has an idea that for every scene to work, there's 4 parts to it, and she kind of explains what those 4 parts are. She has, like I said, the tracking system where there's different folders, and they may be part of different parts of your book. It may be the setting, it may be the rules of the universe, it may be kind of if you have different scenes at various stages of completion, you have different folders for them. So I thought that from someone who leans more of an analytical standpoint, I thought or project management standpoint, I thought that was an interesting method of doing it. She has a small section on why writers who are successful may not always make the best teachers that I thought was really interesting. And there's a critique of kind of what if thought of developing stories. By that means, like, what if one day you rubbed a lamp and a genie popped out of a lamp? And so kind of these prompts that you see in not only elementary and middle school and high school writing courses, but there as well, and why those are not effective ways of communicating or developing a story. She does throughout the book have a work in progress that one of her, I'm not sure if it's her student or someone she knows, has given her the stages of this book, from just the basic idea and how she develops an idea, and the tools and the processes that she uses, the procedures that she uses to develop the idea, from just an idea to a fully fledged novel. I thought that was actually really interesting. So I thought that stuff was all good. It reminded me, well, I'll get into what it reminded me of later in the video, but the things that worked a little bit less for me, she has a critique of both pantsers, discovery writers, as well as those who outline, and she makes what felt like to me relatively broad generalizations about both groups. The idea that for discovery writers, the way she described it is someone who's a discovery writer may get into the novel itself without really laying down the foundation of why a character is the way that they are. And she doesn't seem to really entertain the idea that you could go backwards, and once you have kind of the now, you could write a chapter in the character's past. She's very adamant that you should only really write from a linear standpoint in terms of starting from the most in the chronology of the book, to start with really the earliest event and kind of work your way forward, really understanding the foundation of everything that happens before kind of going into the book itself. She uses kind of I don't know if she uses the term unclosed wound, but this idea that everyone has, all of your characters, your main character especially, will have a trauma or something in their past, that the internal struggle of the character is really overcoming that trauma or transforming from that trauma in some way, shape, or form, and how the unclosed wound and the external events of the novel should work hand in hand, so that way that you have the internal and the external struggle should have some symbiotic relationship to each other, where it kind of makes sense, and the external plot elements are helping drive the character towards making these internal changes, which I thought was really interesting. I wish she had spent more time talking about how to intertwine those things a little bit cleaner. I think the idea itself was really powerful, but I didn't think that there was a lot done to walk you through how to make sure that you're developing these things in tandem. And then the other two things I think that were quibbles were, there, like I said, there's an element of brain science in the book. She kind of dispenses with that relatively quickly, and it's really not the focus of the book. So if that is a topic that you're interested in, you may go into this thinking a lot of it's going to be about brain science and storytelling and things of that nature. It's relatively short shrift. It's really mostly, like I said, her tool for writing craft. And I will say this, I may have been influenced. I typically don't read reviews before reading and reviewing something. I did read, because I had this on in my phone for such a long time, I did read a AuthorTube YouTuber, Laura Wright's, her review of this, and so I maybe have been influenced from that. But she also had kind of a harder time with the work in progress. The work in progress is, in short, a story about a television writer, a successful television writer, who realizes that she has not opened herself up to love the way that she should, and a traumatic event happens in her life that kind of forces her to do this, and in so doing, she has to go through a strange series of events where she captures a dog in order to convince her sister that she is stable, because she's gone through this traumatic event. And so I thought and that's the work in progress that Lisa shows these various stages of. And I thought that the writing itself for the novel was quite good. When you get to the bare bones, the sentence-to-sentence writing and the craft of the writing, it's good. I kind of agreed with Laura Wright in the sense that the story itself was not something I particularly found interesting. And so I maybe wish that certainly the part where there's 4 parts of a scene, I wish that Lisa Cron had gone back and used maybe something from a previously published novel to kind of walk through how 4 parts of a scene can be effective. And I think wish she had used like a famous example, I don't know if it Wizard of Oz or something like that, that would have kind of, Hunger Games or whatever it would have been to kind of showcase that a little bit more clearly, that specific part of it. I really didn't have that big of a problem with the work in progress, because I think it illustrated the methodology that Lisa recommends very clearly. Whether or not you have to love the book and be interested in the book that this woman is writing in order to really work through this methodology, I don't really know. But I also, like Laura Wright's, I wasn't a huge fan of this idea. I thought it was just kind of not my cup of tea, I'll put it that way. Ultimately, who do I think should read the book? I think that if you are someone who leans towards an outlining perspective but haven't found your outlining method yet, I think this is a very step-by-step way of doing it. And I think that the steps that she puts forward all made sense to me. It wouldn't be the way that I would necessarily use this, but what it reminded me of, a cross between The Golden Theme, which is a book I've reviewed and we'll put a link to in the channel, and both of Randy Igmerson's books, The Snowflake Method, as well as The Snowflake Method for Writing Scenes. Those books, if you kind of cross those things, co-populated those things, cross-pollinated those things, you would have come to kind of a similar thing to this, in my opinion. That's what it reminded me of. Because like Brian McDonald, I believe, is the author of The Golden Theme, she recommends starting with kind of an idea, a thematic idea, and then working through her folder. I'm going to call it the folder method. I don't know if she has a better term for it, but her folder method for categorizing these different ideas, categorizing these different steps in the process. She has a very prescriptive way of doing things, which is that you write the first chapter, you write the last chapter, and then you go back and write the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And she explains in the book why she recommends doing that. And that made sense. And I think for a lot of people, this would be a very effective way of doing these things. She has a kind of a template for setting up a scene that I thought would be very helpful for a lot of people. So if you find yourself kind of moving in the direction or think that you would be more of an outliner, this is a method I think that would work for you. I think she has a relatively low opinion of discovery writers, like I said before. And she does have some things about outliners as well that I think she's not a fan of. I think her point was that most outliners focus on the external plot to the detriment of the internal development of the main character. And I think that's why the Snowflake method works for a lot of people, is that you kind of have to cross back and forth into those two things. But so that is the Story Genius. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a different way of doing things. If you're someone who is looking for a way to do things, I think she lays it out really clearly. And I think there's a lot of good advice in there. I think the parts about the writers not always making the best teachers I thought was interesting. And if you're looking for a method, you could do a lot worse. And so, but if you have read Igmerson and you have read Brian McDonald, I don't know how much brand new is there. I thought it was cool to see just a work in progress from someone who just has like the barest bones idea. And the one was, based on her writing, was a writer of some skill, because her writing samples of the chapters were very strong. Just the idea itself, for me, it wasn't really something that would have sparked my interest in the finished product, but she clearly had skills as a writer. So I think it was interesting kind of seeing the whys and how Lisa's kind of pushing her towards, again, what she believes to be the most important thing, which is the main character's change and evolution over time, and how you have the internal struggle, and that's really ultimately the most important thing. She does kind of mention that, there's a very, very brief mention of, well, what if you have more than one protagonist, and she has this idea of an alpha protagonist, and she doesn't really focus on it too, it's not really something that she spends too much time on, but that was also one of the things that irked me in reading this. I'm like, well, there are works that have multiple protagonists, and they're really thematically linked, and it's really difficult to pick out one protagonist, but that may bother you, that may not bother you, but so that's the Story Genius. If you are looking for an outlining method that's different than anything else that you have read in the past, I think this is a very well-written, easy-to-follow method that may work for you. And next time I will be reading Walk Away by Cory Doctorow. Until next time, please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Like the video, I'll leave my Twitter link as well as those links below. Also have the link to the Laura Wright's review of this as well if you want to check out another review of this book. Until next time, bye.